Hello and welcome to a second line day. Today we are exploring the second line of gate 25, the gate of innocence, the gate of the spirit of the self, and the second line is called the existentialist. Second lines are the hermits. They are usually described as being in their room with the lights on, it's dark outside, so they can't see out, but others can see in. Second lines are naturals at doing something that they enjoy, so they don't have to study in the way that the first line does. They have this natural talent and they often learn very quickly. And so whoever is looking in through their window is picking up on that because they're sort of projected out. This is the projection field that the second line lives in. Second line doesn't really want to know about the foundation. It just wants to live out what's possible on the basis of that foundation, really. It's resting on the foundation, you could say. I'm a second line, Bear's a first line. He really loves to know how things work. He always wants to dig into something. Me, not really. I'm just happy that they do work. And I'm very happy that we've got first lines who want to know how they work, because then he can also be practical about things when they don't work so well. But as a second line, we don't generally want to be bothered with that. Just often it's interesting that people come to us who do bother us, who do want to call us out. Second lines are always being called out, really. It is the function of the mechanic, and mystically it's very important. I mentioned the mystical in this case because the 25 is a very mystical gate. And if you have the 25 too, the existentialist, then this is about being called out. It's the key to being found in a way. Being called out is one part of the process. The other part is actually being capable of whatever you're being called out for. Otherwise, you end up being the paper tiger. You get called out and you're so thrilled to be called out for something that you'd actually just follow the call, regardless of whether you can do anything with that or not. And then that's not so healthy for you. The two has a relationship to the five. There's a resonance there. And the fifth line is always worried about its reputation. And the second line with its resonance, it's not quite to the degree of the fifth line, but it doesn't want to, be called a paper tiger. That's not going to do it any good. And so this is where we find a great educational theme for the second line, and that is discernment. I've mentioned this several times as we've been around this journey, that they do have to learn, or we do. I say I'm a second line, I'm a 2-4. We have to learn who is right for us, if that call is correct for us. Because if it's not, if we can't deliver on that call, it's best to stay at home. In these gates of love, we see that some have, there are certain lines which they're unusual in their performance or in their value. This second line, particularly so, because it embodies the nature of what innocence really is. Innocence is only possible existentially. There's no other way to be innocent. Collective love is rooted in being oneself. Selflessness, motivelessness is rooted in the now. Only in the now is one free of guile. The lifetime learning says devotion and dedication to the now. Like all lower trigrams, the motivelessness is only broken by the other side stepping in, because that's the nature of the hexagram. The motivelessness is naturally going to be there. And in this moment, what has been motiveless and selfless can take on another nature. When someone says to you, "Oh, you're so selfless," in that moment, your selflessness can actually begin to disappear. So wherever you have a second line in your design, that's where everybody else sees you. This is your window, if you like, and because they see you, they are going to call on that aspect of your nature. So it's really important to be prepared in that second line that you have. So again, remember, this is an introduction line, devotion and dedication to the now. It doesn't happen in the moment. This is an ongoing process. It's a developmental process that is learned through the course of the first half of the life. Although how one measures the first half of the life is an interesting question. It's an existential question in itself, isn't it, really? In the exaltation, the perfection of the intellect through concentration and focus on what is rather than what could be or what has been. The innocence of the self and its protection can only be maintained in the now. The moment that the 25-2 lives in the now, then they have what is correct for them in the now. They get called out because people see that they could have more, they could be more, they could be greater. Otherwise, they don't pay any attention. Nobody ever gets to see the flowering of that. The second lines must be called out in their lifetime, but what they're called to and who calls them, wow, that's another story. If you look inside the 25-2, you see somebody who is just in the now. They don't know why they're doing the things they do. They're just there in that process. And it doesn't mean that it's intellectual or that they have an intellectual capacity. Some will, of course, and others won't. It will depend on the rest of the design and on who comes into their aura and on what the transit is doing. But the fact of the matter is that the longer the 25-2 is allowed to be in its motivelessness, the more it will come to recognize ultimately at the intellectual level what it means to be surrendered. That's the nature of what universal love is all about. Universal love is the acceptance that we are helpless in all of this. And all you can do is get out of your own way, not interfere, but be here right now, in the now. And you can't be anywhere else. So it really is just getting a hang of it and saying, it's kind of like, oh, fuck it, this is where I am. Let's embrace it, in the detriment, a dedication that can never be free of personal motivation and its attendant projections. A lack of innocence in the now that risks protection through projection. So other people are always going to impact on second lines, and it's not about the person themselves. It's only about how they deal with the others that come into contact with them. The second line is always being pulled out by forces, and they can collapse under the pressure. They can be paper tigers, not equipped to deliver on what the other person is seeing. And the moment that somebody pulls them out of there, that's the moment they're being offered something in the future. And that's very well the moment when they're in trouble, because they are not here to live out of an expectation of the future, of what may come. They're here to be now. This is the moment when the 25-2 is seen by someone for what they are. Oh, you've been so motiveless, so selfless, but really you should be rewarded. And it's not that they just do this for nothing. They don't even know what they're doing. They're just in it. But the outside force is going to come on them. And because of that, this projection comes in. And with projection, there's this mixing of terms where all of a sudden the individual, like the abstract, is suddenly trying to figure out what the pattern's going to be. If I stay selfless, oh, I'll become a saint. But that can only come from the outside coming in. 25-2 isn't sitting there thinking that naturally, because this is an overview line that we have. These people are pulled out of the now all the time. And when they're pulled out of the now, they can be shocked, of course, because they're meeting a force that they didn't recognize was going to be there. And often it's projected on them that they had a motive all along, but they didn't. The love that can be generated out of these gates is what has been generated for the benefit of the totality. It comes out of the individual, but it is there for the global whole. The 25-2 is a very beautiful motivelessness. I'm not sure about that word, but anyway, but of course, when it is being motivelessness, it is in the world naturally, but it still has to also be in the world, in the mundane world. And because it is not equipped to be in the world, to meet the world, it can end up losing its innocence, which means that it loses its existential nature. After all, regardless of the perspective of the driver, whether we're looking forward out of the front window or whether we're looking out the rear view window and the back, or whether we're simply here now in the present, we're all in the experience together, and we're all actually in the now of the experience we're having together. And the world is fundamentally existentialist, whether we like it or not, whether we choose to accept it, acknowledge it, or any of it. It's still here doing its existential thing. The only way to be is to be now, whether we can or not, simply because we are, regardless of the illusion. Ra said once that the biggest mistake he made in naming things in human design was with the exaltation and detriment terminology, because he said people had such judgments about those words. He once heard a story about a woman who decided to take out all the detriments from her copy of the Ravi Ching. Apparently God told her that Ra had made a mistake, and so she decided that she would take all the detriments out. He said that he grew to love his detriments. In many cases, he found them more valuable than just about all his other activations, because the detriments are an incredible force in our life the moment we surrender to them. They're not bad. It's not about good or bad. He did say at one point he wished he'd called them this and that, because that's all they are. They can be great teachers. Either way you look at them. Out of the detriment in this second line comes a much deeper understanding of what it means to be in the now by being torn out of the now, by jumping out of the now. And if they're aware of that, this can be a path of mastery for them. If they're not aware of it, it could be a path of a lot of pain. I've mentioned before that, what we have in our design as a consistent activation, we are designed and equipped to deal with. So if you're made to jump out of the now, to be caught in expectation, well, that's what you're made to do. And if you live it out purely, you do get the reward, regardless of anything else. It's not about it being a bad thing. Second line, like the first line, it doesn't know that there's anything else at the other end of the channel. And the 25-2 is going to get called out by something shocking and arousing, and they're equipped for it. But they have to have the discernment to make sure it's the right call, because not every call is the right call. Just like for a projector, not every invitation is the right invitation. And the generator is sometimes going to respond, and the manifestor isn't always going to initiate. These things, we still have to use our strategy and authority in order to know what's correct for us. So the 25-2 is going to be called out. In the mysticism of the 25-51, we have, this is one of the channels in the mystical way. The 51 jumps into the void, and it's an ego gate. And it says, I am leaping into the void. And when it leaps into no choice. And it leaps into the embrace of the gods and the forces. And when it lands on the other side, at the 25, it says, I did it. 25 says, you did what? You're not the jump. You were the jumper. And that's over. The 25 always has to deal with the power of the ego at the other end. And it's the 25 that always has to land on its feet. So the grounding comes through the earth in the 46, line 2, the prima donna. This is someone who is always in the right place at the right time, although they don't know it. And the moment someone tells them, hey, you're great, you're always in the right place at the right time, it can release a lot of power within them. The 46 is a very existential gate. It's always in the right place. That's their serendipity. And so it's a great support for the existentialist of the 25-2. The moon has been in gate 14 since 0911, the sacral gate of power skills, and next it moves to gate 34 at 2031. Again, it's a sacral gate. This is the gate of power, the power of the great. Where power is only great when its display or use serves the common good. This is a gate of empowerment. It's a potent source of pure, vital energy that emerges through response, empowering individuation and the expression of uniqueness. I've talked a bit about the centering circuit that the 25 is part of. The 34 is also part of that. And you can hear it in the language here. You know, it's empowering individuation and the expression of uniqueness, which is what integration is all about. It's what individuality is all about, but particularly integration and centering. So centering starts with the 34 going up to the 10. So you've got that channel of exploration, that following one's convictions. You've got power, you've got behavior, crosses the G center into the 25, the innocence, and then down into the shock and arousing of the 51. That's the centering circuit. So as I said, listen to the language and you can pick up little bits like, oh, I get that. I understand that bit a little bit. The sacral is our center for sex and for life and for mating and caring for what's been created. But the 34 is actually an asexual energy that needs to remain a pure energy resource, not shared with others in order to ascertain its independence. It keeps that separation to be able to act on its convictions. You know, it just sort of has that little bit of a distance there. And then finally, we have the moon moving into gate 9 at 0748, the taming power of the small, the gate of focus, where potential can be fulfilled through detailed attention to all pertinent aspects. This is the determination to direct energy and focus on what is essential for one's own process. And while sacral energy is available to focus, the challenge is to sustain extended periods of concentration that require stillness in order to succeed. And without gate 52 providing some of that, there can be a deep restlessness in the energy here. This is logical. This is a format gate for the logical circuit. And it's also the end of our line 2 exploration for the 25th gate. Thank you very much for joining me. And I will see you again for a third line day tomorrow. And until then, as always,